We continue Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. We are still in Cimon. Our native Chaeronea was then in a distressed condition, too sensible and too poor to meet with anything but neglect. Cimon, being sensible of this, and looking upon himself as injured already, resolved to inflict punishment. Accordingly, he and 16 of his companions conspired against the captain, but that the design might be managed without any danger of being discovered, they all daubed their faces at night with soot. Thus, disgraced and inflamed with wine, they set upon him by break of day, as he was sacrificing in the marketplace, and having killed him with several others that were with him, they fled out of the city, which was extremely alarmed and troubled at the murder. The council assembled immediately and pronounced sentence of death against Cimon and his accomplices. This they did to justify the city to the Romans, but that evening, as the magistrates were at supper together, according to the custom, Cimon and his confederates, breaking into the hall, killed them, and they fled again out of the town. About this time, Lucullus chanced to be passing that way with a body of troops upon some expedition, and this disaster having but recently happened, he stayed to examine the matter. Upon inquiry, he found the city was in no wise faulty, but rather that they themselves had suffered. Therefore he drew out the soldiers and carried them away with him. Yet Cimon continued to ravage the country all about. The citizens, by messages and decrees, in appearance favorable, enticed him out of the city, and upon his return made him gymnasiarch. But afterwards, as he was anointing himself in the vapor baths, they set upon him and killed him. For a long while after, apparitions continuing to be seen, and groans to be heard in that place, so our fathers have told us. They ordered the gates of the baths to be built up, and even to this day those who live in the neighborhood believe that they sometimes see specters and hear alarming sounds. The posterity of Cimon, of whom some still remain, mostly in Phocis, near the town of Styris, are called Aspolomeni, that is, in the Aeolian idiom, men daubed with soot, because Cimon was thus besmeared when he committed this murder. But there being a quarrel between the people of Chaeronea and the Orchomenians, their neighbors, these latter hired an informer, a Roman, to accuse the community of Chaeronea as if it had been a single person of the murder of the Romans, of which only Cimon and his companions were guilty. Accordingly, the process was commenced, and the cause pleaded before the praetor of Macedon. Since the Romans as yet had not sent governors into Greece, the advocates who offended the inhabitants appealed to the testimony of Lucullus, who, in answer to a letter the praetor wrote to him, returned a true account of the matter of fact. By this means the town obtained its acquittal and escaped a most serious danger. Genesis 34, they didn't take that approach. It was like, well, let's go after everybody instead of the guilty party. The citizens thus erected a statue to Lucullus in the marketplace, near that of the entity Bacchus, which there's a text about Bacchus that was rewritten 4 centuries later into the Gospel of John, which was by far the first one. It's another, 40 years before, not 40 years, it's another 30 years before you get any fragment of anything. So it was written in the 90s, and then there was one written in the 20s, and the last one its first manuscript was about 150. But anyways, it's 90-something% exactly the same text. If you compare them, we also have the same impressions of gratitude, and though removed from the events of the distance of several generations, we yet feel the obligation to extend to ourselves, and as we think an image of the character and habits to be a greater honor than one merely representing the illustrious men. And without swerving from the truth, will record his actions, and commemoration will be itself sufficient proof of our grateful feeling, and he himself would not thank us if in recompense for a service which consisted in speaking the truth, we should abuse the memory with a false and counterfeit narration. For as we would wish that a painter who is to draw a beautiful face, in which there is yet some imperfection, should neither wholly leave out, nor yet too pointedly express what is defective, because this would deform it, and that spoil the resemblance. So since it is hard, or indeed because perhaps impossible, to show the life of a man wholly free from blemish in all that is excellent, we must follow truth exactly and give it fully. Any lapses or faults that occur through human passion or political necessities we may regard rather as the shortcomings of some particular virtue than as the natural effect of vice, and may be content without introducing them curiously and efficaciously into our narrative, if it be but of tenderness to the weakness of nature, which has never succeeded in producing any human character so perfect in virtue as to be pure from all admixture and open to no criticism. On considering with myself to whom I should compare Lucullus, I find none so exactly his parallel as Cimon. They were both valiant in war and successful against the barbarians, both gentle in political life, and more than any others gave their countrymen a respite from civil troubles at home, while abroad each of them raised trophies and gained famous victories. No Greek before Cimon, nor Roman before Lucullus, ever carried the scene of war so far from their own country, putting out of the question the acts of Bacchus and Hercules, and any exploit of Perseus against the Ethiopians. Ethiopia or something like that is burnt-faced. So they divided off Egypt and Libya, but pretty much like the rest of Africa, they called that, and somebody called Africa again the Semites on south and whatnot. So, that's where we get the reference from. Medes and Armenians are again of, how do you say Jason? Because it wasn't a J. It would have been an I. Ison? Was that how you say his name? Of which any record that deserves credit can be said to have come down to our days. Moreover, in this they were alike, that they did not finish the enterprises they undertook. They brought their enemies near their ruin, but never entirely conquered them. There was yet a great conformity in the free goodwill and lavish abundance of their entertainments and general hospitalities, and in the youthful laxity of their habits. Other points of resemblance, which we have failed to notice, may be easily collected from our narrative itself. Cimon was the son of Miltiades and Hegesippala, who was by birth a Thracian, and daughter to King Alauros, as appears from the poems of Melanthius and Archelaus, written in praise of Cimon. By this means, the historian Thucydides was his kinsman by the mother's side, for his father's name also, in remembrance of this common ancestor, was Olorus, and he was the owner of the gold mines in Thrace, and met his death, it is said, by violence in Skepta Hala, a district of Thrace, or Thrac. Again, I don't have the Greek characters here, but if it's Latin, you said every C is a K in Latin. And his remains having afterwards been brought into Attica, a monument is shown as his among those of the family of Cimon, near the tomb of Elpinique, Cimon's sister. But Thucydides was of the township of Hadamus, and Miltiades and his family were Lachiada. Miltiades, being condemned in a fine of 50 talents of the state, and unable to pay it, was cast into prison, and there died. Thus Cimon was left an orphan very young, with his sister Elpinique, who was also young and unmarried. And at first he had but an indifferent reputation, being looked upon as disorderly in his habits, fond of drinking, and resembling his grandfather, also called Cimon, in character, whose simplicity got him the surname of Coelamus. Stesimbrotus of Thasos, who lived near about the same time with Cimon, reports of him that he had little acquaintance either with music or with any of the other liberal studies and accomplishments than common among the Greeks, that he had nothing whatever of the quickness and the ready speech of his countrymen in Attica, that he had great nobleness and candor in his disposition, and in his character in general resembled rather a native of Peloponnesus than of Athens, as Euripides describes Hercules. Rude and unrefined, for great things well endued. Is it Hercules? Is that how you say Hercules? I don't. Some of these I really should know from the Greek, but anyways. For this may fairly be added to the character of which Stesimbrotus has given of him. They accused him in his younger years of cohabitating with his own sister Elpinique, who indeed otherwise had no very clear reputation, but was reported to have been over intimate with Pelagnatus, the painter, and hence, when he painted the Trojan women in the porch, and called the Plesiantium, and now the Poecile, he made Laodique a portrait of her. Pelagnatus was not an ordinary mechanic, nor was he paid for his work, but out of a desire to please the Athenians, painted the portico for nothing. So it is stated by the historians, and in the following verses by the poet Melanthius, wrought by his hand the deeds of heroes' grace, at his own charge are temples and our place. Some affirm that Elpinique lived with her brother, not secretly, but as his married wife, her poverty excluding her from any suitable match. But afterwards, when Callias, one of the richest men in Athens, fell in love with her, and proffered to pay the fine the father was condemned in, if he could obtain the daughter in marriage with Elpinique's own consent, Cimon betrothed her to Callias. And yeah, don't, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. No, have to have some sort of limits to that sort of thinking. Because you should have some sort of ethic beyond what's legal. Come on. There is no doubt but that Cimon was, in general, of an amorous temper, for Melanthius, in his elegies, rallies him on his attachment for Asteria of Salamis, and again for a certain Anestra, and There can be no doubt of his unusually passionate affection for his lawful wife, Isodique, the daughter of Euryptolemus, the son of Megacles, nor of his regret, even to impatience at her death, if any conclusion may be drawn from those elegies of condolence addressed to him upon his loss of her. The philosopher Venatius is of opinion that Archelaus, the writer on physics, was the author of them, and indeed the time seems to favour that conjecture. All the other points of Cimon's character were noble and good. He was as daring as Miltiades, and not inferior to Themistocles in judgment, and was incomparably more just and honest than either of them, fully their equal in all military virtues. In the ordinary duties of a citizen at home, he was immeasurably their superior, and this too when he was very young, his years not yet strengthened by any experience. For when Themistocles, upon the Median invasion, advised the Athenians to forsake their city and their country, and to carry all their arms on shipboard, and fight the enemy by sea in the straits of Salamis, when all the people stood amazed at the confidence and rashness of this advice, Cimon was seen, the first of all men, passing with a cheerful countenance through the Ceramicus on his way with his companions to the citadel, carrying a bridle in his hand to offer to what was considered to be the goddess, intimating that there was no more need of horsemen now, but of mariners. There, after he had paid his devotions to this entity and offered up the bridle, he took down one of the bucklers that hung upon the walls of the temple, and went down to the port, by this example giving confidence to many of the citizens. He was also of a fairly handsome person, according to the poet Ion, tall and large, and let his thick curly hair grow long. After he had acquitted himself gallantly in this battle of Salamis, he obtained great repute among the Athenians, and was regarded with affection as well as admiration. He had many who followed after him, and bade him aspire to actions not less famous than his father's battle of Marathon. And when he came forward in political life, the people welcomed him gladly, being now weary of Themistocles, in opposition to whom, and because of the frankness and easiness of his temper, which was agreeable to every one, they advanced Cimon to the highest employments in the government. The man that contributed most to the promotion was Aristides, who early discerned in his character his natural capacity, and purposely raised him that he might be a counterpoise to the craft and boldness of Themistocles. After the Medes had been driven out of Greece, Cimon was sent out as an admiral, when the Athenians had not yet attained by their dominion by sea, but still followed Pausanias and the Lacedaemonians, and his fellow citizens under his command were highly distinguished both for excellence of their discipline and for their extraordinary zeal and readiness. And further perceiving that Pausanias was carrying on secret communications with the barbarians, and writing letters to the king of Persia to betray Greece, and puffed up with authority and success, was treating the allies haughtily, and committing many wanton injustices. Cimon, taking this advantage by acts of kindness to those who were suffering wrong, and by his general humane bearing, robbed him of the command of the Greeks before he was aware, not by arms, but by his mere language and character. The greatest part of the allies, no longer able to endure the harshness and pride of Pausanias, revolted from him to Cimon and Aristides, who accepted the duty, and wrote to the ephors of Sparta, desiring them to recall a man who was causing dishonor to Sparta and trouble to Greece. They tell of Pausanias that when he was in Byzantium, he solicited a young lady of a noble family in the city, whose name was Cleonice, to debauch her. Her parents, dreading his cruelty, were forced to consent, and so abandoned their daughter to his wishes. The daughter asked the servants outside the chamber to put out all the lights, so that approaching silently and in the dark towards his bed, she stumbled upon the lamp, which she overturned. Pausanias, who was fallen asleep, awakened and startled with the noise, thought an assassin had taken that dead time of night to murder him, so that hastily snatching up his poniard that lay by him, he struck the girl, who fell with the blow and died. After this he never had rest, but was continually haunted by her, and saw an apparition visiting him in his sleep, and addressing him with these angry words, "Go on thy way, unto the evil end, that doth on lust and violence attend." And, well, if he took her to wife, what's the debauch part? But obviously it's a forced marriage, so that's this was one of the chief occasions of indignation against him among the Confederates, who now joining the resentments and forces with Cimons besieged him in Byzantium. He escaped out of their hands, and, continuing, as it is said, to be disturbed by the apparition, fled to the oracle of the dead at Heraclea, raised the ghost of Cleonice, and entreated her to be reconciled. Accordingly she appeared to him, and answered that, as soon as he came to Sparta, she should speedily be freed from all evils, obscurely foretelling, it would seem, his immediate death, his imminent death. This story is related by many authors, and there's entities that kind of see where things are going, right? Cimon, strengthened with the accession of the allies, went as general into Thrace, for he was told that some great men among the Persians of the king's kindred, being in possession of Ion, a city situated upon the river Strumon, infested the neighboring Greeks. First he defeated these Persians in battle, and shut them up within the walls of their town. Then he fell upon the Thracians of the country beyond the Strumon, because they supplied Ion with victuals, and, driving them entirely out of the country, took possession of it as conqueror, by which means he reduced the besieged to such straits that Boots, who commanded there for the king, in desperation set fire to the town, and burned himself, his goods, and all his relations in one common flame. Now, if somebody's in war with another group, you got to consider what sort of aid you're giving to them, because you really kind of are joining the war on their side when you do that. By this means, Cimon got the town, but no great booty, as the barbarians had not only consumed themselves in the fire, but the riches of their effects. However, he put the country about into the hands of the Athenians, a most advantageous and desirable situation for a settlement. For this action, the people permitted him to erect the stone Mercuries, upon the first of which was this inscription: "Of bold and patient spirit, too, were those who were the Strumon under Ion flows, with famine and the sword to utmost need, reduced at last the children of the Mede." Upon the second stood this: "The Athenians to their leader this reward, for great and useful did accord. Others hereafter shall from their applause learn to be valiant in their country's cause." And upon the third following: "With Atreus' sons this city sent of yore, divine Menestheus to the Trojan shore. Of all the Greeks, so Homer's verses say, the ablest man an army to array. So old the title of her sons, the name of chiefs and champions in the field declaim. is it Troyon, or how do you say Trojan? Because there's definitely no J sound. Though the name of Cimon is not mentioned in these inscriptions, yet his contemporaries considered them to be the very highest honors to him, as neither Miltiades nor Themistocles ever received the like. When Miltiades claimed a garland, Socrates of Decelea stood up in the midst of the assembly and opposed it, using words which, though ungracious, were received with applause by the people. When you have gained a victory by yourself, Miltiades, then you may ask to triumph so too. What then induced them so particularly to honor Cimon? Was it that under the other commanders they stood upon the defensive, but by his conduct they not only attacked their enemies, but invaded them in their own country, and acquired new territory, becoming masters of Idon and Amphipolis, where they planted colonies, as also they did in the isle of Scoras, which, Cimon having taken on the following occasion, the Dolopians were the inhabitants of the isle, a people who neglected all husbandry, and had for many generations been devoted to piracy. This they practiced to that degree that at last they began to plunder foreigners that brought merchandise into ports. Some merchants of Thessaly, who had come to shore near to Ctesium, were not only spoiled of their goods, but themselves into the confinement. Now, Sodom and Amra and the other cities of the plain that some sort of volcanic event or something, because you see cities, you see buildings like upside down and toppled over, and little bits of sulfur and stuff like that in that place. But they were known for attacking the people who went into that area. So highway robbers and other things too, right? These men afterwards. Well, I mean, there's a correlation here because there's a lot of mythic stuff in here. These men afterwards, escaping from their prison, went and obtained sentence against the Scarians in a court of Amphictyons, and when the Scarian people declined to make public restitution and called upon individuals who had got the plunder to give it up, these persons in alarm wrote to Cimon to succor them with his fleet and declared themselves ready to deliver the town into his hands. Cimon by these means got the town expelled to the Dolopian pirates, and so opened the traffic of the Aegean Sea, and understanding that the ancient Theseus, the son of Aegeus, when he fled from Athens and took refuge in his isle, was here treacherously slain by King Lycomedes, who feared him. Cimon endeavored to find out where he was buried, for an oracle had commanded the Athenians to bring home his ashes and pay him all due honors as a hero, but hitherto they had not been able to learn where he was interred, as the people of Scaras dissembled the knowledge of it, and were not willing to allow a search. But now, great inquiry being made, with some difficulty he found out the tomb and carried the relics into his own galley, and with a great pomp and show brought them into Athens 400 years or thereabouts after his expulsion. This act got Cimon great favor with the people, one mark of which was the judgment afterwards so famous upon the tragic poets. Sophocles, still a young man, had just brought forward his first plays. Opinions were much divided, and the spectators had taken sides with some heat. So to determine the case, Cephion, who was at that time Archon, would not cast lots who should be judges, but when Cimon and his brother, commanders with him, came into the theatre, after they had performed the usual rites to the entity of the festival, he would not allow them to retire, but came forward and made them swear, being 10 in all, one from each tribe, the usual oath, and so being sworn judges, he made them sit down to give sentence. Eagerness for victory grew all the warmer from the ambition to get the suffrages of such honorable judges, and the victory was at last adjudged to Sophocles, which Aeschylus is said to have taken so ill that he left Athens shortly after, and went into anger with Sicily, where he died, and was buried near the city of Gela. So is it Sicila? Sicila? Ion relates that when he was a young man and recently come from Chios to Athens, he chanced to sup with Cimon at Laomedon's house. After supper, when they had, according to custom, poured out wine to the honor of what they considered to be gods and goddesses, drink offerings don't have to be wasted, even water, but, Cimon was desired by the company to give them a song, which he did with sufficient success, and received the commendations of the company, who remarked on his superiority to Themistocles, who, on a like occasion, had declared he had never learnt to sing, nor play, and only knew how to make a city rich and powerful. After talking of things incident to such entertainments, they entered upon the particulars of the several actions for which Cimon had been famous, and when they were mentioning the most signal, he told them that they omitted one, upon which he valued himself most for addresses and good contrivance. He gave this account of it when the allies had taken a great number of the barbarians prisoners. In Sestos and Byzantium they gave him the preference to divide the booty. He accordingly put the prisoners in one lot, and the spoils of their rich attire and jewels in the other. This the allies complained of as an unequal division, but he gave them their choice to take which lot they would, for that the Athenians should be content with that which they refused. Herophatus of Samos advised them to take the ornaments for their share and leave the slaves to the Athenians, and Cimon went away and was much laughed at for his ridiculous division. Well, slaves may be worth more in terms of whatever, but there's less, per se, injustice in taking the wealth versus the slaves. Well, not all slavery is the same condition. In a way, the right and wrong scale of it can be different. For the allies carried away the golden bracelets and armlets and collars and purple robes, which the Athenians had only the naked bodies of the captives, which they could make no advantage of, being unused to labor. But a little while after, the friends and kinsmen of the prisoners coming from Lydia and Phrygia redeemed everyone his relations at a high ransom, so that by this means Cimon got so much treasure that he maintained his whole fleet of galleys with the money for 4 months, and yet there was some left to lay up in the treasury at Athens. Cimon now grew rich, and what he gained from the barbarians with honor he spent yet more honorably upon the citizens, for he pulled down all the enclosures of his gardens and grounds, that strangers and the needy of his fellow citizens might gather of his fruits freely. At home he kept a table plain, but sufficient for a considerable number, to which any poor townsman had free access, and so might support himself without labor, with his whole time left free for public duties. Aristotle states, however, that his reception did not extend to all the Athenians, but only to his fellow townsmen, the Lachiada. Besides this, he always went attended by 2 or 3 young companions very well clad, and if he met with an elderly citizen in a poor habit, one of these would change clothes with the decayed citizen, which was looked upon as very nobly done. He, enjoined them likewise to carry a considerable quantity of coin about them, when they were to convey silently into the hands of the better class of poor men, as they stood by them in the marketplace. This Cratinus, the poet, speaks of in one of his comedies, that the Archilochi, for I, Metrobius too, the scrivener poor, of ease and comfort in my aid secure, my Greece's noblest son, in life's decline, Cimon, the generous-hearted, the divine, well-fed and feasted, hope till death to be, death which, alas, has taken him ere me. Gorgias the Leontine gives him this character, that he got riches, that he might use them, and he used them that he might get honor by them. And Critias, one of the 30 tyrants, makes it, in his elegies, his wish to have the Scopad's wealth and Cimon's nobleness, and King Agesilaus' success. Oedicus, we know, became famous in Greece only because, on the days of the sports, when the young boys run naked, he used to entertain the strangers that came to see these diversions. So that's where the whole streaking comes in, right? Because the naked sports. But it's not so much important how much wealth you get as what you do with your wealth. If you make it about what you're going to do with your wealth rather than getting the wealth, and of course allowing more freedom and kind of, bringing about a sense of charity is a lot better. But people are, oh no, the right wing, no, and encouraging merit. But Cimon's generosity outdid all the old Athenian hospitality and good nature. For though it is the city's just boast that their forefathers taught the rest of Greece to sow corn, and how to use the springs of water, and to kindle fire, yet Cimon, by keeping open house for his fellow citizens, and giving travelers liberty to eat the fruits which the several seasons produced in his land, seemed to restore to the world the community of goods which mythology says existed in the reign of Saturn. Those who object to him that he did this to be popular and gain the applause of the vulgar are confuted by the constant tenor of the rest of his actions, which all tended to uphold the interests of the nobility and the Spartan policy, of which he gave instances when, together with Aristides, he opposed Themistocles, who was advancing the authority of the people beyond its just limits, and resisted Ephialtes, who, to please the multitude, was for abolishing the jurisdiction of the court of Areopagus, and when all of this time, except Aristides and Ephialtes, enriched themselves out of the public money, he still kept his hands clean and untainted, and to his last day never acted or spoke for his own private gain or emolument. They tell us that Rosacus, a Persian who had traitorously revolted from the king, his master, fled to